Welcome back to another journey through the shadows of Five Nights at Freddy's, where tonight we're stepping into the restaurant's darkest corner, the moment that defined everything that followed, the event that transformed a family pizzeria into a graveyard of trapped souls. This is the Missing Children Incident, an event so thoroughly woven into every game, every book, every piece of this franchise that you'd think after more than a decade we'd have all the answers. But here's the thing about Five Nights at Freddy's. The deeper you dig into what should be straightforward, the more questions bubble up from underneath. Questions about who died, how many children were actually taken, what exactly happened to their bodies, and why even now in 2025, with all the games and novels and movies we've received, certain details remain frustratingly out of reach. June 26th, 1985. That date appears in a newspaper clipping in the very first game, a detail so easy to miss amid the chaos of surviving Five Nights. 2 local children lured into a back room during late hours of operation. Bodies never found. A man in a company mascot costume. These fragments, scattered across grainy newsprint in a game released in 2014, established the foundation for a mystery that would consume thousands of hours of community investigation, theory crafting, and debate. And what's remarkable is how much we've learned since then. Names like Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy emerging from puzzle books and gravestone minigames. Yet how much still sits in that frustrating space between confirmed and speculated? This isn't just another retelling of events you already know. We're going to walk through every piece of evidence, every hint dropped across games spanning from 2014 to 2024, examining not just what happened but what we still don't understand. We'll look at the victims themselves, at how William Afton executed these murders, at the possession mechanics that followed, at the debates that rage on about a possible 6th victim, about Golden Freddy's true nature, about questions that even Scott Cawthon seems content to leave dangling in the air like the balloons that float away at the end of Happiest Day. Whether you're listening to this as you drift towards sleep, letting these details wash over you like a familiar horror story, or you're actively following along to piece together the timeline yourself, know that we're going to take our time here. This is comprehensive. This is detailed. This covers everything from the restaurant's layout to the psychology of the killer, to the supernatural mechanics of remnant and possession, to the modern reinterpretations in games like Security Breach and Help Wanted 2. We're covering the core incident, yes, but also its echoes, the ways it shaped William Afton's later experiments, how it connected to Charlie Emily's death, how it drove Michael Afton's path, how it ultimately led to the fire that was meant to end everything, but somehow didn't. And here's what makes this particularly fascinating in December 2025. We have Into the Pit's game adaptation, showing us 6 bodies instead of 5. We have Return to the Pit, the interactive novel, seemingly contradicting some of those details. We have the week before adding new context to the 1985 pizzeria. We have Secret of the Mimic expanding William's technological pursuits in ways that retroactively affect how we understand his methods. The Missing Children Incident isn't a static historical event in this universe. It's a living piece of lore that keeps shifting shape as new information emerges, forcing us to constantly reassess what we thought we knew. So settle in. We're going deep. We're examining newspaper text, minigame sprites, voice lines from Ultimate Custom Night, grave arrangements in Pizzeria Simulator, logbook puzzles, novel trilogy parallels, Fazbear Frights connections, everything. We're building the most complete picture possible of what happened on June 26, 1985, and in the days and weeks that followed, when 5 children, possibly 6, walked into Freddy Fazbear's Pizza expecting birthday cake and games, and instead met a man in a yellow rabbit suit who would trap them in metal shells for decades. This is the story of the Missing Children Incident, the tragedy that birthed the haunting, the crime that William Afton got away with, at least initially, the moment when Fazbear Entertainment's negligence crossed from dangerous into fatal, the beginning of Charlie Emily's supernatural intervention through the puppet, the foundation upon which every subsequent horror in this franchise was built. Let's begin at the beginning, with the place where it all went wrong. The setting, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, 1985. Picture a family restaurant in the mid-1980s, all checkered floors and arcade cabinets, and that particular smell of pizza grease and cleaning products that somehow defined childhood for an entire generation. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1985 wasn't the decrepit horror show we see in the first game, not yet anyway. This was a functioning establishment, still drawing crowds despite the shadows hanging over it from earlier tragedies, still marketing itself as the place where fantasy and fun come to life. The animatronic band stood on their stage under coloured lights. Freddy Fazbear with his top hat and microphone, Bonnie the rabbit with his red guitar, Chica the chicken with her cupcake companion, and Foxy the pirate tucked away behind the curtain in Pirate Cove. These weren't just mechanical entertainers. They were the stars, the draw, the reason parents brought children here for birthday parties and weekend outings. The restaurant itself followed a layout that would become familiar to anyone who played the games, though with subtle differences depending on which location we're discussing. Phone Guy's training tapes and messages paint a picture of a sprawling complex with multiple dining rooms, prize corners, arcades, party, rooms, and importantly for our purposes, back areas not accessible to the public. The show stage sat at the heart of the main dining room, the animatronics performing their choreographed songs during the day, while children ate pizza and parents tried to have conversations over the mechanical music. Pirate Cove occupied its own alcove, Foxy's curtain opening periodically for his shows. The bathrooms, the kitchen, the hallways leading to the offices, all of it designed to maximize the family-friendly atmosphere while hiding the mechanical and administrative necessities behind the scenes. But let's focus on the element most crucial to understanding how William Afton pulled off his crimes, the safe room. This wasn't some secret underground bunker or hidden chamber requiring special keys. The safe room was, at least initially, a standard back room used for storage and as a space where employees could take breaks, where spare animatronic parts were kept, where the old spring-lock suits that predated the main band were stored away. What made it safe had nothing to do with security and everything to do with the animatronics programming. These rooms were deliberately left off the digital maps loaded into the robot systems, meaning that when the animatronics roamed in their free-roaming mode, they would never pathfind to the safe room. They would never check it. They would effectively not know it existed. This design choice came from practical concerns. The safe room housed older equipment, spring-lock suits like Spring Bonnie and Fredbear, technology that Fazbear Entertainment was phasing out due to multiple spring-lock failures that had injured employees. These suits, capable of functioning both as animatronics and as wearable costumes for performers, required careful handling. Moisture, sudden movements, even heavy breathing could trigger the spring locks to snap back into their compressed position with enough force to puncture flesh and bone. Phone Guy's training tapes from 5 Nights at Freddy's 3 describe the proper procedure for wearing them. wind the locks tightly, avoid damp environments, and absolutely do not touch the locks once donned. Multiple simultaneous spring lock failures at a sister location had led to the technology being deemed temporarily unfit for use, and the suits were relegated to storage in these safe rooms, invisible to both the wandering animatronics and, crucially, to the security camera systems. Because here's the other detail that made these rooms perfect for William Afton's purposes. No cameras. Fazbear Entertainment, always cutting corners, always prioritizing profit over safety, didn't install surveillance in every corner of their restaurants. The main dining areas, the hallways, the entrances, sure. But back rooms, especially ones containing nothing but old equipment, why waste the money? This lack of oversight created blind spots, places where someone could operate without being recorded, without leaving easily, discoverable evidence. The atmosphere in 1985's Freddy Fazbear's Pizza sat at a strange intersection. The restaurant was still operational, still hosting parties, but it existed under a cloud. Charlotte Emily, daughter of co-founder Henry Emily, had been found dead outside another Freddy location back in 1983, an event shown in the Take Cake to the Children minigame. The bite of 83, while occurring at Fredbear's family diner, rather than a Freddy's location proper, had still damaged the brand's reputation. Parents were already nervous about the animatronics. Local news had already run stories questioning safety protocols. The company was fighting an uphill battle to convince families that their children would be safe here. And in many ways, the restaurant itself was safe. The animatronics during operating hours were just robots performing their programming. The staff, aside from one particular employee, were regular people trying to do their jobs. The building didn't hide monsters behind every corner. It was just a pizzeria. But that ordinariness, that normalness, made it the perfect hunting ground for someone who understood how to exploit trust, how to use a company mascot costume as a shield, how to identify the blind spots in both surveillance and supervision. The restaurant's operation hours mattered here. Most of the children who went missing were taken during late hours of operation, that transition period when the day crowd was thinning out, when parents were gathering belongings and rounding up tired kids, when attention wavered and supervision gaps opened up. Not the middle of a packed Saturday afternoon, but those twilight hours when staff were beginning closing procedures, when the pizza counter saw fewer orders, when the arcade machines blinked in near-empty rooms. These were the moments William Afton used, times when a child could be separated from their group without immediate notice, when someone in a mascot suit walking through the restaurant wouldn't draw suspicion because performers in costume were expected, were part of the environment. The spring-lock suits stored in the safe room weren't just decorative relics. They represented an earlier era of Fazbear Entertainment's approach, when the line between animatronic and performer was deliberately blurred. Spring Bonnie, the yellow rabbit suit, had been one of the original mascots alongside Fredbear, the golden bear that preceded Freddy Fazbear as the company's face. These suits allowed employees to wear them and perform in close interaction with children during the day. Then the suits could be placed back in animatronic mode and allowed to move on their own. It was innovative for its time, creating that illusion that the characters were truly alive. But the danger inherent in the design, the potential for catastrophic failure if any single lock snapped, made them a lawsuit waiting to happen. By 1985, most locations had moved to the safer, purely mechanical animatronics like Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. But the springlock suits hadn't been destroyed, just retired, kept in storage with vague plans to possibly refurbish them or use them as backup performers. This meant they were available, accessible to someone who knew where they were stored, who had worked with them before, who understood how to don one without triggering the locks. William Afton, as a co-founder of the company with Henry Emily, would have had intimate knowledge of these suits' locations and operation. More than that, he would have been trusted to access them. His presence in back areas wouldn't raise flags because he was supposed to be there. He had legitimate reason to be walking through employee-only sections. The layout of the restaurant created natural pathways for luring children away from public view. A hallway leading to the bathrooms would take a child past doors to employee areas. A prize corner near the back of the building would put kids close to storage rooms. Pirate Cove's alcove provided partial concealment. The restaurant's design, meant to create a sense of maze-like exploration and discovery that kept children entertained, inadvertently created numerous opportunities for someone to guide a child just around this corner or through this door without being immediately visible from the main dining area. And the staff, well-meaning but often undertrained and overwhelmed, couldn't watch everywhere at once. Birthday parties meant clusters of children, groups that made head counts difficult. The arcade attracted kids who wanted to play one more game while parents finished pizza. The bathrooms required children to leave the main area unsupervised. Standard operating procedure at family restaurants in the 80s didn't include the kind of heightened security awareness we might see today. Parents trusted that public spaces during business hours were safe. Staff focused on their assigned duties, serving food, performing in costume, cleaning up messes, not constantly monitoring every child's location. This combination of factors, the safe room's camera-free status, the storage of wearable mascot suits, the restaurant's layout with its numerous semi-private spaces, the transitional late-hour timing, the trust inherent in a family entertainment venue, created what criminologists would call a perfect storm of opportunity. A predator with patience, with understanding of the environment, with the right tools and timing, could exploit every single one of these vulnerabilities. And William Afton had all of those qualities in terrible abundance. The restaurant in 1985 wasn't a haunted house. The animatronics weren't yet possessed. The walls didn't drip with decades of accumulated tragedy. It was just a pizzeria with colorful mascots and mediocre food and arcade games. But it sat on the cusp of becoming something else entirely. That transformation beginning on a single day in June when 5 children, possibly 6, walked toward a back room they should have never entered. The perpetrator, William Afton's methods. William Afton, also known as the purple guy in the minigames that depict him, stands as one of gaming's most effective villains, not because of supernatural powers or physical dominance, but because of his understanding of human psychology, particularly how children think and how trust operates in public spaces. By 1985, Afton was already a serial killer. Charlotte Emily's death in 1983, shown in the Take Cake to the Children minigame, where he murders her outside while she's locked out of the building, had been his first known victim, the crime that set him on this path, or perhaps revealed a darkness that had always been there. But Charlotte's murder was opportunistic, taking advantage of a vulnerable child alone outside. The Missing Children Incident represented something more calculated, more audacious, a pattern of killings conducted inside the restaurant during operating hours. Understanding Afton's methods requires understanding what we know about him at this point in the timeline. He was one of Fazbear Entertainment's co-founders alongside Henry Emily, meaning he had extensive knowledge of the restaurant's operations, access to back areas, familiarity with the animatronics and their technology, and crucially, he was trusted. Employees wouldn't question his presence in storage rooms. Parents wouldn't be suspicious if they saw him in a performer's costume. That was his company, his technology. Children wouldn't have been taught to fear someone wearing an official restaurant mascot suit, because those suits represented fun and safety, not danger. The choice of the Spring Bonnie costume as his disguise was calculated brilliance in the most horrific way possible. Spring Bonnie, the Yellow Rabbit, was a recognized character from the franchise's earlier days at Fredbear's Family Diner. Children would have seen Spring Bonnie on posters, in commercials, perhaps in old photographs from the diner. The suit created instant recognition and trust. A child approached by someone in the Spring Bonnie costume wouldn't think stranger danger. They'd think mascot, character, part of the show. The suit transformed Afton from an adult man, automatically triggering children's learned wariness, into a friendly cartoon rabbit who existed to make them happy. The mascot costume served multiple purposes beyond psychological manipulation. It concealed his identity completely. No facial features, no hair color, no physical identifiers. Even the video surveillance that eventually identified him could only show a person in a company mascot suit, not definitively prove which employee was inside. The suit also normalized his presence in any part of the restaurant. Parents seeing Spring Bonnie walk through the dining area would assume it was part of the entertainment. Staff would think he was performing his designated role. Children would be drawn to him rather than avoid him. It was the perfect camouflage, hiding in plain sight by wearing exactly what everyone expected to see. But the suit alone wasn't enough. Afton had to separate children from their groups, from supervision, from safety. This required understanding how to manipulate child psychology. The methods we see hinted at through various games and books show a pattern of offering something children wanted, something that would make them willingly follow him away from the crowd. For Susie, the first victim confirmed through Withered Chica's ultimate custom night line, "I was the first. I have seen everything." The lure was her dead dog. The Fruity Maze minigame shows this manipulation in heartbreaking detail. A little girl playing an arcade game, her dog having been killed. She's grieving and vulnerable. Spring Bonnie appears behind her in the reflection, telling her that her puppy is still alive, that he knows where the dog is, that he can take her to it. A child in emotional distress, desperate for good news, would absolutely follow an apparently trustworthy mascot who promised their pet wasn't really dead. For the other children, the specific lures remain undocumented in the games, though we can infer similar patterns based on William's established methods. The Toy Chica. The high school years segments from Ultimate Custom Night, interpreted by many as metaphorical retellings of Afton's murders, suggest varied approaches tailored to each victim. Different promises for different children, exploiting individual vulnerabilities or desires. Some theorists suggest offers of exclusive prizes, special surprises, or opportunities to see behind-the-scenes areas, anything that would make a child feel chosen enough to follow without alerting their parents. While these specific tactics aren't directly confirmed for Gabriel, Jeremy, Fritz, and Cassidy individually, they align with predatory patterns and Afton's demonstrated willingness to manipulate children's emotions and trust. Children in the mid-80s, before the massive public awareness campaigns about stranger danger that would come later, were more trusting of adults in positions of apparent authority, and a company mascot very much held that position in a child's mind. The timing of these lures mattered. Afton didn't try to grab children from the middle of packed dining rooms during peak hours. He waited for moments when attention was divided, when parents were distracted gathering coats or paying bills, when children were in transitional spaces like hallways or side rooms, when the crowd's surveillance was weakest. A birthday party winding down, children drifting from the main group to play arcade games or use the bathroom, created perfect opportunities. A child walking alone through a hallway to return to their table could be intercepted by a friendly mascot who offered to show them something amazing in the back. Once a child followed him away from public areas. The path led to the safe room, that camera-free, off-grid space where no one would interrupt, where no evidence would be recorded, where he could commit murder without immediate discovery. The games never explicitly detail the methods Afton used to kill his victims, leaving those mechanics mercifully obscured behind minigame abstractions and newspaper euphemisms. The novels in their separate continuity provide some details about his approaches, but the game's canon maintains a deliberate vagueness about the actual violence, focusing instead on the aftermath. Bodies that needed to be hidden, children who would be reported missing, a crime scene that somehow had to be concealed well enough to avoid immediate police discovery. This is where the animatronic suits came into play as more than just disguises. William Afton stuffed the bodies of his victims into the empty animatronic shells. The suits, large enough to contain their mechanical endoskeletons during normal operation, had enough space to accommodate a small body alongside the machinery. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and possibly one of the old Fredbear Golden Freddy suits. Each became a tomb for a child. This served the practical purpose of hiding the bodies, but it also showed Afton's understanding of how the restaurant operated. The animatronics sat in the back during off hours, stood in corners during maintenance, were moved around by employees who wouldn't necessarily notice added weight or different balance. The bodies would decompose inside the suits, creating the foul smell that parents and employees eventually complained about. The blood and mucus reported around the animatronics' eyes and mouths. But by then, Afton would have moved on. His crimes committed, the evidence sealed inside the very entertainment that drew families to the restaurant. The question of whether Afton acted alone or had accomplices remains debated. The evidence suggests he worked solo, at least for the actual murders. His access to back areas was legitimate. His presence in costume wouldn't be questioned. Adding another person would only increase the risk of someone talking, of leaving more evidence, of losing control of the situation. This was a man who understood how to exploit systems, who had spent years learning the restaurant's rhythms, who knew exactly when and where he could operate undetected. He didn't need help. He needed opportunity, patience, and the willingness to do something monstrous that most people couldn't even imagine. What drove him to these crimes remains one of the franchise's central mysteries. The games hint at obsession with life and death, with consciousness and its persistence, suggesting his murders were experiments as much as crimes. William's later work with Remnant, the supernatural substance that binds souls to metal, implies he was studying possession, trying to understand and harness it. Did he kill these children to create possessed animatronics deliberately? Was he testing whether death could be reversed through mechanical means? Or was he simply a serial killer whose crimes happened to intersect with supernatural consequences he later tried to exploit? The timeline suggests the murders came before the possession, that the children's spirits inhabiting the animatronics was an unexpected result rather than the intended goal. But Afton's quick adaptation to this development, his later attempts to harvest remnant from these same possessed machines, shows a man who never let horror go to waste. His escape from immediate capture after the murders speaks to both his planning and his luck. The newspaper clippings from the first game state that video surveillance identified the man responsible and led to his capture the following morning, but that the suspect was later released due to lack of evidence. Afton was caught on camera in the spring Bonnie suit, luring children away, but without bodies, without physical evidence linking him directly to murder, rather than just inappropriate contact with minors, without witnesses who saw the actual killings. The legal system couldn't hold him. He knew this would happen. He counted on it. The safe room's lack of cameras meant no footage of the murders themselves existed. The bodies hidden inside the animatronics wouldn't be discovered for weeks, if not months. By the time the smell became undeniable, by the time the suits were torn apart to find the source, Afton would have established alibis, covered his tracks, created enough reasonable doubt that prosecution became impossible. This aspect of the missing children incident, the way Afton used institutional failings and legal technicalities to escape justice, mirrors real-world cases where predators exploit the very systems meant to protect children. Fazbear Entertainment's cost-cutting measures, their lack of comprehensive surveillance, their inadequate staff training, their prioritization of profit over safety, created an environment where a killer could operate. The legal system's requirement for physical evidence, for proof beyond reasonable doubt, for bodies and witnesses and direct connections, allowed him to walk free despite video showing him leading children away. The failure wasn't singular. It was systemic, institutional, a cascading series of oversights and negligences that let 5 children, maybe 6, die in the back room of a pizzeria, while families ate pizza mere walls away. William Afton's methods weren't supernatural or extraordinary. They were the tactics of someone who understood vulnerabilities, who exploited trust, who planned carefully and acted boldly, who used his legitimate access to create illegitimate opportunities. The horror of the missing children incident isn't that it required some impossible scenario to occur. It's that every element Afton exploited, the costume, the safe room, the timing, the legal technicalities, these existed as standard parts of how the restaurant operated. He didn't create special conditions. He used what was already there. And that's perhaps the most disturbing realization. Given the same environment, the same access, the same willingness to cause harm, it could happen again, did happen again, as evidenced by the 1987 murders shown in the Save Them minigame. Afton proved the system was broken, and then he broke it again. The victims, 5 children's stories behind every statistic, every minigame sprite, every possessed animatronic, were actual children whose lives ended in that restaurant's back room. The games and books gradually revealed their identities, their names emerging from puzzles in the survival logbook, from gravestones in Pizzeria Simulator's Lawkeeper ending, from glimpses in minigames like Fruity Maze. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. 5 names that would become central to everything that followed in Five Nights at Freddy's twisted narrative. Understanding who these children were, how they were lured, which animatronics they came to possess, helps transform the missing children incident from abstract horror into something more affecting, more personal, more heartbreaking. Let's start with Gabriel, the child who came to possess Freddy Fazbear himself. Of all the victims, Gabriel's details remain somewhat sparse in the game's direct telling, though the graphic novels adapted from the original trilogy provide more physical description. Darker skin, bushy brown hair, a yellow shirt with an orange collar, a kid who loved the Freddy's character enough to end up bound to him. The name Gabriel first appeared on a gravestone in Pizzeria Simulator, positioned in a way that corresponded with Freddy's head placement in FNAF 3's endings, confirming which animatronic he possessed. The positioning of the graves, each one carefully placed to match the spacing of the animatronic heads in the bad and good endings of the third game, provided a map for decoding the identities of the 5 children. The positioning of Gabriel's grave in Pizzeria Simulator's ending, along with references in the games to a birthday party occurring during the incident, has led some to theorize that Gabriel may have been celebrating his birthday when the murders took place. While this connection isn't explicitly confirmed, it would add a layer of tragic irony if the day meant to be his happiest became instead the day he died. The presence of party hats on the victims in Into the Pit's depiction supports the idea that a celebration was happening, though whether it was specifically Gabriel's party remains interpretive rather than definitive. The Fruity Maze minigame shows Spring Bonnie using similar tactics with Susie, manipulating a child's emotional state to create an opening, and it's reasonable to assume Gabriel receives similar treatment, a promise of something special, something just for him, because today was his day. Gabriel's possession of Freddy, the leader of the animatronic band, the face of the franchise, carries significance beyond just random assignment. Freddy Fazbear represented everything the restaurant pretended to be: wholesome family entertainment, childhood joy, innocent fun. Having Gabriel's angry spirit trapped inside that icon transformed the restaurant's mascot into something vengeful, something that hunted night guards, mistaking them for the killer. Phone Guy's first night message in the original game takes on darker implications, knowing that Freddy, standing on that stage, contained a murdered child, that the animatronic's erratic behavior stemmed from a soul desperate for revenge. Jeremy, possessing Bonnie the Rabbit, has even less detailed characterization in the games proper. The name appears on another gravestone in the Lawkeeper ending, positioned to correspond with Bonnie's location. One curious detail: a night guard in FNAF 2 shares the name Jeremy Fitzgerald, and the franchise has always played with names having multiple meanings, multiple bearers across the timeline. Whether any connection exists between the murdered child Jeremy and the night guard Jeremy, or if it's simply Scott Cawthon reusing a name, remains debated. Bonnie, notably, is often one of the most aggressive animatronics across the games, particularly Withered Bonnie in FNAF 2, with his faceless appearance becoming a source of terror. The child inside him, Jeremy, drives that aggression, that relentless pursuit through the halls, searching for someone to blame, someone to attack. The connection between the children and their animatronics seems somewhat arbitrary. There's no indication the kids specifically loved these characters before being stuffed into them, but rather, it's about which suits were available, which bodies needed hiding. Jeremy ended up in Bonnie because that's where he was placed. The possession came after, the spirit binding to the machine through mechanisms we'll explore later in the Give Gifts, Give Life section. But there's poetic horror in the randomness. These children didn't choose to become Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, or Foxy. They were victims twice over. First murdered, then trapped in machines forced to perform the very entertainment that made them vulnerable to begin with. Susie stands out as the most detailed victim in terms of the games giving us actual information about her lure and personality. The Fruity Maze minigame in Pizzeria Simulator provides a window into her final moments. A little girl, blonde curly hair, blue eyes, wearing a white top with purple lace, playing an arcade game. The arcade cabinet itself becomes part of the minigame, transforming from a normal game into a glitched, corrupted interface showing dead dogs, coffins and flowers, visual representations of Susie's grief. Her dog, traditionally named Sparky in fan interpretations, though the name may not be canon, had been killed recently, hit by a car according to the novel trilogy's version of events. This tragedy made Susie emotionally vulnerable, a target for manipulation. Spring Bonnie appears in the reflection of the arcade screen, talking to Susie, telling her that her puppy isn't really dead, that he knows where the dog is, that he can show her. The cutscene that plays shows Spring Bonnie leading her away, the promise of seeing her pet again overwhelming her caution, her judgment, her understanding that leaving the main area was dangerous. This lure, using a child's grief and hope against them, represents psychological manipulation at its cruelest. William Afton identified her emotional state, recognized the opportunity, and exploited it with the promise of something she desperately wanted to be true. Susie possesses Chica, the yellow chicken animatronic whose cupcake companion becomes a recurring element across the franchise. Withered Chica's voice line in Ultimate Custom Night provides one of the game's few direct confirmations of the possession timeline. "I was the first. I have seen everything." This statement, coming from the animatronic Susie inhabits, establishes that she was the first of the 5 children killed during the Missing Children Incident, not the first child William Afton ever murdered. Charlotte Emily holds that horrific distinction, but the first taken during this specific event on June 26, 1985. Her declaration of having seen everything implies she witnessed the subsequent murders of the other children, that she was already dead, already stuffed in Chica, when Gabriel, Jeremy, Fritz, and Cassidy were killed. This creates a horrifying scenario where Susie's body, hidden inside Chica, was likely still in the safe room when Afton lured the other children. Did he move the suit out before bringing in more victims? Did he kill them all in rapid succession, bodies piling up? The logistics of multiple murders in a single day raise questions about how long Afton had access to the safe room uninterrupted, how he ensured no staff member checked on him, how he managed the increasingly difficult task of stuffing bodies into suits while previous victims were already concealed nearby. The minigame's evidence suggests the murders occurred over the course of several hours at minimum, twilight to late evening, giving him time to work. Fritz possesses Foxy, the out-of-order pirate animatronic, kept behind the curtain at Pirate Cove. Like Jeremy and Gabriel, Fritz receives less individualized characterization in the games themselves, his name appearing on the gravestones corresponding to Foxy's position. The novel trilogy describes him as having red hair and freckles, fitting the pirate aesthetic, though again, those books exist in a parallel continuity, and details don't always carry over. One interesting note: a night guard in FNAF 1 is named Fritz Smith, creating another instance where victim names and night guard names overlap, potentially intentional on Scott's part to blur lines between characters, or potentially just convenient name reuse. Foxy's aggressive behavior across the games, his sprinting down the hallway in FNAF 1, his distinctive pattern of peeking out from Pirate Cove before charging, stems from Fritz's spirit driving those actions. The out-of-order status, The curtain keeping him hidden from the main stage creates isolation both for the animatronic and the child possessing it. Where Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica stood together on stage, Foxy remained apart, just as Fritz remained apart in death, separated from the other children by the animatronic he was forced to inhabit. And then there's Cassidy, the fifth child, the one possessing Golden Freddy, the source of more debate and speculation than perhaps any other victim in the entire franchise. The name Cassidy comes from solving a puzzle in the survival logbook, a product that bridged game lore and merchandise. Pages of the logbook contain subtle questions asked by what appeared to be a spirit, alongside faded text that formed an entirely separate conversation. By following clues, coordinates hidden in the book's word searches, fans spelled out Cassidy, the name printed nowhere directly but revealed through puzzle solving. This connected to the fifth gravestone in Pizzeria Simulator's ending, the one partially obscured by grass, the one positioned to correspond with Golden Freddy's location. Cassidy's gender remains a subject of community debate. The graphic novels from the original trilogy depict a character named Cassidy as a girl with long black hair, but those books exist in a separate continuity where this Cassidy possesses Bonnie instead of Golden Freddy. In the game's continuity, Ultimate Custom Night's character often identified as the one you should not have killed, widely theorized to be Golden Freddy's spirit, and by extension Cassidy, appears in a face reveal that many viewers interpret as male presenting with blonde hair, though the deliberately low-quality, unclear image leaves room for various interpretations. Voice lines from UCN animatronics refer to this entity with masculine pronouns. However, the survival logbook page showing the puppet giving cake to a figure with black hair in pigtails, positioned above text about the happiest day of your life, has led some to interpret this as Cassidy, suggesting female presentation. The evidence points in multiple directions, and Scott Cawthon's choice to maintain this ambiguity may be intentional. This ambiguity about Cassidy's basic identity extends to the larger mysteries surrounding Golden Freddy. Unlike Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, which are physical animatronics with endoskeletons and proper mechanics, Golden Freddy appears as a slumped suit in the office, a ghost more than a machine, capable of teleporting, appearing, and disappearing, existing in ways that defy the other animatronics' physical rules. Theories abound about whether Golden Freddy is actually Fredbear from the closed Fredbear's Family Diner, whether it's a separate springlock suit, whether Cassidy's possession differs fundamentally from the others because the puppet never placed a mask on the fifth child in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame. The Golden Duo theory, suggesting both Cassidy and the crying child from FNAF 4 somehow share possession of Golden Freddy, emerged from parallels with the Stitch Wraith from Fazbear Frights, showing two souls in one body. This would explain why Golden Freddy exhibits characteristics different from the standard possessed animatronics, why Ultimate Custom Night might represent a vengeful spirit tormenting William Afton, even after the other children found peace, why references to Golden Freddy across the games sometimes feel contradictory or split. But whether Golden Duo is correct, whether Cassidy acts alone, whether the fifth child is someone else entirely, these questions persist despite years of investigation. What we know for certain: Cassidy was one of the children murdered on June 26, 1985. Cassidy's spirit became attached to the entity called Golden Freddy. Cassidy appears on the gravestones with the other victims, deserving the same recognition, the same remembrance. However, Cassidy's story played out after death. whether uniquely vengeful or following the same path as the others, starts with the same tragedy. A child lured away by someone in a spring Bonnie costume, murdered in a back room, becoming a part of the Missing Children Incident's awful tally. These 5 children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, were real to their families, had personalities, preferences, hopes. The games can't give us their full stories, can't show us their lives before that June day. But they can give us names, can place gravestones in dignified arrangements on a peaceful hillside, can show us moments like Happiest Day, where their spirits finally receive the party they deserved, finally blow out candles and wear masks, not as eternal prisons, but as temporary props at a celebration that lets them move on, remembering them as individuals rather than just victims, as children rather than just spirits, matters to understanding why the Missing Children Incident cut so deep into this franchise's foundation. They weren't supposed to die. They were supposed to eat pizza and play games and go home with their parents. William Afton took that future from them, and the ramifications echoed for decades. June 26, 1985. The Day of Horror. Reconstructing the actual events of June 26, 1985 requires pulling together evidence from newspaper clippings, minigame imagery, novel parallels, and logical inference about timing and opportunity. We know the basic facts. Multiple children disappeared from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza during operating hours. Police suspected a man in a company mascot costume. Video surveillance captured enough to identify a suspect. Bodies were never found. But the hour-by-hour timeline, the sequence of lures and murders, the specific locations within the restaurant where each victim was taken, these details exist in that frustrating space where we can theorize but not confirm. The day likely began, normally. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened for business, families arriving for weekend entertainment, a birthday party or parties scheduled, the animatronic band performing their standard shows on the main stage. William Afton, working either as an employee directly or visiting the location in his capacity as co-founder, would have scoped out the environment early, identifying which children were potential targets, which families seemed less attentive, which staff members were stretched thin, covering multiple duties. Predators who operate in public spaces require reconnaissance, careful observation of patterns and of vulnerabilities before acting. The murders likely didn't all occur in immediate succession. Removing 5 children, possibly 6, from a public restaurant without anyone immediately noticing requires spacing out the disappearances, allowing time between each lure for parents and staff to remain unaware that something systematically horrible was happening. Susie, as established by Withered Chica's ultimate custom night line, was first. The Fruity Maze scenario, whether it occurred early in the day or later toward evening, shows her being emotionally compromised by her dog's recent death, making her vulnerable to Spring Bonnie's promise that the pet was still alive. Once she followed the mascot into the back area, into the safe room, William Afton murdered her and stuffed her body into the Chica animatronic suit. This first murder would have been the most careful, the one where Afton tested his methods, confirmed that his plan would work. Once Susie's body was concealed inside Chica, the suit positioned wherever it needed to be stored during this process, Afton returned to the public areas to select his next victim. The gaps between disappearances might have been 30 minutes, an hour, long enough that no pattern immediately emerged, that each child's absence seemed isolated rather than part of a coordinated attack. Fritz came next in the sequence, though the exact order of the middle three victims, Fritz, Gabriel and Jeremy, can't be definitively established from available evidence. The grave positioning in Pizzeria Simulator suggests a possible sequence based on their distance from the camera, with some interpreting the arrangement as indicating death order. But this remains analytical interpretation rather than explicit confirmation. Each would have received a personalized lure based on what Afton learned about them through brief observation or conversation. A child who seemed eager to play arcade games might be told there was a secret game in the back. A birthday boy might be promised a special surprise. A child looking for the bathroom could be redirected through employee areas. The specifics varied, but the pattern held. Make the child feel special, chosen, excited enough to follow without questioning why an adult was leading them away from the crowd. Each murder required similar logistics. Get the child to the safe room, kill them quickly enough to prevent screaming or sustained struggle that might alert someone. Stuff the body into the available animatronic suit. Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, each became a tomb. The work was physical, gruesome, requiring strength to manipulate bodies and metal suits, requiring focus to ensure the concealment was effective enough that casual observation wouldn't reveal anything wrong. Afton was methodical, experienced from Charlotte Emily's earlier murder and possibly other victims we don't know about, working through his checklist of targets with horrible efficiency. The timing suggests this happened during late afternoon into evening, that transition period when the lunch crowd had cleared, but the dinner rush hadn't yet peaked, or alternatively, during the early evening hours when parties were winding down and families were beginning to leave. The newspaper clipping specifically mentions late hours of operation, suggesting the murders occurred closer to closing time than opening. This would give Afton more opportunity, less supervision, fewer eyes watching the back hallways and storage areas. Staff would be focused on cleaning, on preparing to close, on counting registers and shutting down arcade machines, not on tracking whether all the children from earlier parties had definitely left with their parents. Gabriel's murder, if it occurred during his own birthday party as speculated, would have happened amid the chaos of celebration. Children running between arcade machines and party rooms, parents distracted with cake and presents, staff managing multiple tables and dealing with the inevitable spills and minor crises that accompany events involving dozens of kids. In that environment, one child slipping away with a friendly mascot wouldn't register as unusual or concerning. By the time his parents realized he hadn't come back from going to see something cool or getting his special surprise, Afton would have already concealed the body and returned to public areas, removing the Spring Bonnie costume and appearing as a normal employee or visitor, someone who couldn't possibly have been involved in anything sinister. Jeremy and Cassidy's specific lures remain pure speculation, though we can assume they followed similar patterns, something appealing to each child individually, exploiting their particular interests or emotional states, delivered by someone in a trusted mascot costume, leading to that back room where no cameras watched, when no one would interrupt. The physical act of murder, the methods Afton used, stay mercifully obscured in the game's presentation. We see only the aftermath. Small bodies stuffed into animatronic suits, hidden away from immediate discovery, beginning the decomposition process that would eventually create the foul smell, reported by parents and employees. Cassidy's case carries particular weight in the law community because of the subsequent focus on Golden Freddy and the vengeful spirit. The give gifts Give Life minigame shows the puppet placing masks on 4 children representing Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz. But then a 5th body appears alone in the center of the room for just 1 frame, before Golden Freddy's jump scare ends the sequence. This visual storytelling suggests Cassidy's possession occurred differently or separately from the others, though the exact implications remain a matter of interpretation. Some see this as indicating Cassidy was killed last and found their own way to possess Golden Freddy, without the puppet's direct intervention. Others interpret it as representing a fundamentally different type of possession that set Cassidy apart from the other 4 victims. The discovery of the missing children wouldn't have been immediate. Parents looking for their kids might have initially assumed they were in bathrooms playing one last arcade game with another family by mistake. Staff conducting end-of-day counts might not have realized anyone was missing if the children had been signed in under parties that had already concluded. The gradual realization that multiple children couldn't be found, that they weren't in any of the usual areas, that parents were growing frantic, would have built slowly, horror dawning as more and more people confirmed that yes, their child was definitely not here, was definitely not anywhere they could find. Police arrived to reports of missing children at a restaurant, a nightmare scenario for law enforcement and families alike. They would have searched the building thoroughly, checked every visible area, questioned staff and witnesses. The video surveillance system captured footage showing Spring Bonnie, the yellow rabbit costume, interacting with children, leading them toward back areas. This footage identified the man responsible, according to the newspaper, led to his capture the following morning. But the crucial detail, they never found the bodies. Despite searching the restaurant, despite checking the dumpsters and surrounding areas, despite what must have been an intensive investigation, the children had vanished completely. They were there the whole time, of course, sealed inside the animatronic suits that police probably saw during their search, standing in storage or maintenance areas, appearing to be nothing but entertainment robots. The bodies wouldn't have been immediately obvious. The suits are large, the endoskeletons complex. A body positioned behind the mechanical parts wouldn't necessarily create visible bulges or obvious signs of tampering. And who would think to disassemble a restaurant mascot while searching for missing children? The logic wouldn't connect. You'd search trash cans, storage closets, vehicles, the surrounding neighborhood, not the inside of robots designed to sing birthday songs. William Afton's arrest the following morning, June 27th, must have felt like justice to the families, like confirmation that their nightmare would end with the responsible party, imprisoned, but without bodies, without physical evidence directly linking him to murder versus potential kidnapping or inappropriate contact. The legal system couldn't hold him. The video showed him in costume leading children away, yes, but not explicitly showing violence, not capturing the actual killings, since those occurred in the safe room where no cameras reached. Defense attorneys would argue reasonable doubt. Maybe he was just performing, and the children went missing separately. Maybe someone else in a costume acted afterward. Maybe the children left the restaurant through some other route. The suspect's release devastated the families and outraged the community, but it reflected the reality of what prosecution requires: evidence that proves guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The bodies hidden inside Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy wouldn't be discovered for weeks, possibly months, however long it took for the smell to become undeniable, for maintenance to finally disassemble the suits to find the source of the stench. By then, Afton would have established alibis, created distance from the event, made conviction even more difficult. He understood the system well enough to exploit its requirements for proof, to hide his crime in the one place police would never think to look, inside the very entertainment that defined the location. June 26, 1985, started as a normal day at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It ended with 5 families destroyed, their children vanished, a community traumatized, and a killer walking free despite everyone knowing he was responsible. The day itself, the hours when the murders occurred, remain partially obscured by time, and Scott Cawthon's deliberate choice to leave certain details ambiguous. But the impact was undeniable, permanent, transformative. The restaurant would never recover from this. The franchise would never escape this shadow, and the children would never go home. The investigation and cover-up, the newspaper clippings that appear randomly on the walls in the first 5 nights at Freddy's game, replacing the usual rules for safety poster, provide our primary window into how the investigation unfolded and how Fazbear Entertainment responded to catastrophic tragedy. These articles, written in the concise, detached style of small-town journalism, chronicle a story of initial hope turning to frustration, of a community demanding answers while a corporation frantically attempted damage control, of a legal system that ultimately failed to deliver justice despite video evidence of the suspect's involvement. The first article establishes the basic facts. 2 children were reported lured into a back room during a late operating hours on June 26th. Video surveillance identified a suspect who was captured the following morning, though the children themselves were never found and were presumed dead. The article notes police believed the suspect dressed as a company mascot to gain the children's trust. This initial report mentions only 2 children, suggesting either the disappearances were staggered enough that not all were immediately reported, or the newspaper received information before all 5 cases were connected as part of a single incident. The detail about video surveillance is critical because it confirms that Fazbear Entertainment's cameras, despite not covering the safe room where the actual murders occurred, did capture footage of William Afton in the spring Bonnie costume interacting with children and leading them toward back areas. This footage was substantial enough to identify him, to lead police to make an arrest the very next morning on June 27th. The speed of that arrest, less than 12 hours after the disappearances were reported, suggests the footage was fairly damning, that investigators had clear evidence of a specific individual using a company mascot disguise to lure children away from public areas. But, presumed dead, tells its own story. Without bodies, police couldn't definitively prove murder had occurred rather than kidnapping or some other crime. The children were missing. The circumstances were deeply suspicious. A man had been arrested, but the legal threshold for murder charges requires physical evidence, requires proving not just that someone died, but that a specific person killed them. The bodies hidden inside animatronic suits, presumably still in the building during the police search, remained undiscovered during this initial investigation phase. The second newspaper clipping expands the scope. The count increased to 5 children connected to the incident, with the suspect charged, though bodies remained undiscovered. The article notes that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza faced significant challenges convincing families to return to the establishment following the tragedy. The case grows from 2 children to 5, suggesting that as investigation continued, police connected additional disappearances from that same day. Parents coming forward to report their children missing, witnesses providing information about seeing those children being led away by the same mascot-suited figure. The term suspect convicted in the newspaper creates ambiguity when cross-referenced with other game evidence. Phone Guys FNAF 2. Night 6 message references someone using one of the suits, implying the murders weren't fully resolved legally. The community generally interprets this evidence to mean Afton was arrested and possibly convicted of lesser charges, child endangerment, kidnapping, or similar offences, but not murder due to lack of bodies and physical evidence. He likely served minimal time, if any, before being released, allowing him to continue his activities in subsequent years. The exact legal outcome remains deliberately unclear, with different sources providing pieces that don't form a completely coherent picture of how the justice system handled his case. The final newspaper clipping focuses on consequences for the business itself. The local pizzeria faced shutdown threats from the health department over reports of foul odor emanating from the animatronic mascots. This article, appearing after the initial investigation concluded, connects directly to the bodies decomposing inside the suits. The foul smell that eventually became impossible to ignore, that drove parents to complain and health inspectors to investigate, originated from the children's corpses rotting alongside endoskeletons and wiring. The animatronics had become tombs in the most literal sense, and the physical reality of decomposition could only be hidden for so long. Parents noticed blood and mucus around the eyes and mouths of the animatronics, details Phone Guy mentions in his Night 1 call from FNAF 1, when he notes the robots haven't been cleaned in 20+ years, which would explain the smell. But the smell wasn't just accumulation of general uncleanliness. It was death. It was 5 children's bodies breaking down in the hot, enclosed spaces of mechanical suits, fluids seeping through seams, flesh decomposing in conditions that accelerated rot. The health department's threats of shutdown came from legitimate sanitation concerns that restaurant management couldn't adequately address without revealing what was actually causing the problem. Did Fazbear Entertainment know? Did management eventually discover the bodies inside their animatronics and choose to keep operating anyway? The games leave this ambiguous, but the company's pattern of negligence and cover-up across the franchise suggests they might have prioritized business continuity over properly handling evidence of multiple child murders. If maintenance crews discovered the bodies during attempts to fix the smell issue, if company leadership learned that their mascots contained corpses, the decision to continue operating rather than immediately contact authorities would represent institutional evil on a staggering scale. More likely, perhaps, is that the bodies were discovered after the restaurant's eventual closure, during scrapping or disassembly, too late to be useful for prosecution, but confirming everyone's worst suspicions about what happened to those missing children. The police investigation itself must have been exhaustive by small-town standards. 5 children disappearing from one location in a single day represented a major case, likely drawing state resources, FBI involvement if kidnapping across state lines was suspected. The video evidence provided a clear suspect. Witness statements from parents, employees, and other children who had been at the restaurant that day would have corroborated seeing someone in the Spring Bonnie suit interacting with the missing children. The case wasn't lacking in circumstantial evidence or reasonable suspicion. What it lacked was bodies, physical proof of death. Without corpses, medical examiners couldn't determine cause of death, couldn't provide forensic evidence linking a specific perpetrator to specific homicides through DNA, weapon marks, or other physical indicators. The legal system's requirement for corpus delicti, proof that a crime has actually occurred, became the shield that protected William Afton from murder conviction. Defense attorneys could argue alternative scenarios. Maybe the children ran away. Maybe a third party took them after Afton's interactions. Maybe some bizarre accident occurred. Without bodies, reasonable doubt existed, and in the American legal system, that doubt is supposed to prevent conviction. This failure of justice, the man everyone knew was responsible walking free, created lasting trauma for the families involved and for the broader community. The frustration of watching someone literally captured on video luring your child away, of having police tell you they know who did it but can't prove it enough for court, of seeing that person resume normal life while your child remains missing, presumed dead, represents a special kind of hell. The psychological impact rippled outward. Other parents in the area became hypervigilant. Local businesses installing more cameras and implementing stricter child supervision policies. The sense of safety that comes from assuming public spaces during business hours are protected being shattered. Fazbear Entertainment's response combined legal maneuvering with public relations management. The statement about fighting an uphill battle to convince families to return shows awareness that the company's reputation had been devastated. They couldn't claim nothing happened, couldn't deny that children vanished from their facility. The best they could do was emphasize that a suspect had been identified and was convicted. To whatever limited extent that was true, that the incident was an isolated act by one individual rather than systemic failing, that they were implementing new safety measures, that the restaurant itself was a victim here too. The financial reality couldn't be ignored. Attendance dropped dramatically. Birthday party bookings vanished. Parents understandably didn't want their children anywhere near a location where other children had been murdered. The combination of lost revenue, health department threats, legal costs from families potentially filing civil suits, and the crushing weight of negative publicity pushed the location toward closure. The article's reference to shutdowns being threatened multiple times suggests Fazbear Entertainment fought to keep operating as long as possible, likely hoping that time would dull the community's horror, that eventually families would return if the company could just survive the immediate crisis. This pattern of prioritizing business continuity over ethical responsibility, of trying to minimize and contain, rather than fully address the scope of what happened, defined Fazbear Entertainment throughout the franchise's timeline. The Missing Children Incident wasn't an isolated failure that the company learned from. It was the first major example of institutional rot that would lead to repeated tragedies across multiple locations. The company that allowed William Afton access to back areas unsupervised, that failed to install cameras in all storage rooms, that didn't have protocols preventing children from being led to employee-only areas by mascot performers, that chose to keep operating despite animatronics literally smelling of death. This company would go on to create child-snatching fun-time animatronics, to ignore the Bite of 87, to repeatedly open new locations despite obvious safety issues. The investigation and cover-up phase of the Missing Children Incident reveals institutional failure at every level. Police investigations sufficient to identify and arrest a suspect, but insufficient to gather evidence supporting conviction. A legal system that protected the accused's rights at the expense of justice for victims. A corporation that measured tragedy in quarterly earnings impact rather than human cost. A community left traumatized and unhealed, knowing what happened but unable to see the responsible party face meaningful consequences. And 5 families whose children were never found, never brought home, never properly buried or mourned with the closure that comes from final goodbyes. The bodies inside the animatronics remained until mechanical failure or deepening odor forced their eventual discovery by which point William Afton had moved on to sister location experiments, to further murders in 1987, to a career of horror that the Missing Children Incident had only initiated rather than concluded. Justice delayed became justice denied, and the children's spirits, trapped in those same metal shells, would wait decades before finding any semblance of peace or revenge. Give gifts, give life. The possession. The Missing Children Incident didn't end with 5 bodies hidden in animatronic suits. What came next? The supernatural transformation of those murdered children's spirits into forces that would haunt Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for decades, represents one of the franchise's central mysteries, and the moment when Five Nights at Freddy's shifted from serial killer horror into something involving genuine paranormal possession. The minigame that depicts this transformation, Give Gifts, Give Life from FNAF 2, provides our clearest window into how the animatronics became possessed. Though like everything in this franchise, the exact mechanics and meaning remain subjects of intense debate. The minigame itself is deceptively simple. The player controls the puppet, navigating a sparse room containing 4 small figures that resemble dead children. The text at the top reads "Give gifts," instructing the puppet to approach each child. When the puppet reaches a child, a decorative box appears, the gift being delivered. After all 4 gifts are distributed, the player must return to the center of the room, where the text changes to "Give Life." Approaching each child again causes an animatronic mask to appear on their head. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. The masks, significantly oversized compared to the children's bodies, suggest something beyond simple costume wearing. Throughout this sequence, letters flash on screen spelling HELPT-EM, a desperate plea that captures the puppet's motivation. Completing the minigame triggers Golden Freddy's jump scare, and notably, a 5th body appears for exactly 1 frame before that jump scare, the child who would possess Golden Freddy, separate from the puppet's ritual. Understanding this minigame requires understanding the puppet's, Charlie Emily's, role in the possession process. Charlotte died in 1983, murdered by William Afton outside of Fredbear's location, while the security puppet, designed to keep her safe, deactivated in the rain trying to reach her. Her spirit possessed the puppet immediately, shown in the security puppet minigame from Pizzeria Simulator, where the puppet's deactivation and Charlie's death occur simultaneously. Her essence transferred at the moment of her end. This makes Charlotte the first victim to undergo possession, and importantly, her possession happened accidentally, a consequence of her spirit being in close proximity to an animatronic at the moment of death, rather than through any deliberate process. By 1985, when the Missing Children Incident occurred, Charlie's spirit had been inhabiting the puppet for 2 years, learning its capabilities, developing an understanding of what she had become. The puppet's evident intelligence across the games, its ability to grant life to others, its protective instincts toward children, stems from Charlie's consciousness driving its actions. When 5 more children died at William Afton's hands, when their bodies were stuffed into animatronic suits and left to rot, Charlie recognized them as victims of the same killer who murdered her, and she decided to do something about it. The Give Gifts, Give Life process shows Charlie using the puppet's supernatural properties to enable possession for the other children. The debate in the community centers on what exactly the minigame depicts. Are we seeing the puppet literally stuffing the children's bodies into the suits, as some theorize? Or are we seeing a more metaphorical representation of Charlie, granting the spirits a form of existence after their deaths? The evidence supports the latter interpretation more strongly. Phone Guy's FNAF 2 Night 6 call references someone used one of the suits, implying William Afton himself stuffed the bodies. The newspaper clippings never mention the puppet's involvement in the physical crimes, and Henry Emily's speech in Pizzeria Simulator directly addresses this. No one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours, speaking to Charlie, the puppet's role in helping the other children transition into their possessed state. The mechanics of possession in FNAF's universe operate on principles that Scott Cawthon has hinted at through various games and developed more explicitly through concepts like remnant and agony. Based on the evidence presented across the franchise, a human soul or spirit at the moment of death or shortly after appears capable of attaching itself to physical objects, particularly metal objects, especially when strong emotional connections or physical proximity exist. Charlie's possession of the puppet occurred because she died directly beside it, as shown in the security puppet minigame. The missing children's possession of their respective animatronics stemmed from their bodies being placed inside those suits, creating direct physical connection between corpse and machine, between victim and vessel. However, the evidence suggests possession doesn't happen automatically just from proximity. It requires something more, a catalyst, a supernatural intervention that bridges the gap between spirit and metal. This is where Charlie's role through the puppet becomes significant. As an already possessed animatronic, as a spirit who had learned to manipulate her mechanical form, she could serve as that catalyst for others. The gifts she gives in the minigame might represent this enabling force, the life she gives being the transition from death into haunting. Without Charlie's intervention, the children's spirits might have simply departed, might have passed on to whatever afterlife exists in this universe. With her help, they remained. They merged with the machines. They became capable of moving those mechanical shells with supernatural purpose. The masks appearing on the children's heads in the minigame carries symbolic weight beyond literal costume wearing. These oversized heads, clearly the full animatronic heads rather than simple masks, represent the children becoming the animatronics, their identities merging with Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Gabriel didn't just possess Freddy Fazbear. In a sense, he became Freddy Fazbear, his spirit driving the bear's movements, his emotions fueling its actions, his consciousness trapped behind mechanical eyes staring out at the restaurant that had become his grave. The same for Jeremy as Bonnie, Susie as Chica, Fritz as Foxy. The child and the character merged into something that wasn't quite either, a confused amalgamation of human soul and mechanical puppet. Scott Cawthon described the animatronic's behavior in the first game as animal-like, a key phrase for understanding how possession affects their actions. The children didn't become tactical geniuses plotting elaborate revenge schemes. They became confused, angry creatures operating on instinct and base emotion. They recognized threat responses. They could navigate their environment. They could identify potential prey, but complex reasoning, memory of their human lives, clear understanding of their situation, these were beyond them. The possession preserved their consciousness, but not their sophistication, their humanity, but not their maturity. They were children still, children who had died violently and didn't understand what they were or what had happened to them. Children who only knew they needed to find the man in the yellow suit who hurt them, needed to attack anyone who resembled him, needed to stuff people into suits the way they had been stuffed. Phone Guy's explanation in FNAF 1 about the animatronics trying to force night guards into suits ties directly to this confused state. They'll probably see you as a metal endoskeleton without its costume on, and since that's against the rules here at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit. The animatronics, possessed by murdered children, see security guards as things that need to be put into suits, because suits are where things go. That's what happened to them. That's the only logic they retain from their deaths. It's not revenge in any sophisticated sense. It's compulsion, repetition of trauma, acting out what was done to them. Golden Freddy's possession differs notably from the others, most evident in that fifth child appearing separately in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, never receiving gifts or life from the puppet directly. This visual storytelling suggests Cassidy's possession occurred through different means or achieved different results. Golden Freddy doesn't behave like a physical animatronic across the games. It appears slumped in the office, teleports, vanishes, manifests as a head floating in the hallway, abilities that defy the mechanical limitations the other possessed animatronics face. The common interpretation holds that Golden Freddy is a ghost animatronic. Cassidy's spirit attached to the idea or memory of a suit, rather than to an actual physical machine, giving them powers beyond what Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz possess, while trapped in functional mechanical bodies. The remnant angle, introduced explicitly in later games like Sister Location, through the Scooper blueprints, and explored conceptually through Fazbear Fright stories, provides one explanation for how souls bind to metal. Remnant appears to be a tangible substance that forms when human emotion, particularly agony, becomes attached to metal, creating a link that can preserve consciousness. William Afton eventually learned to harvest and inject this substance into animatronics to create intentional possession. However, the Missing Children Incident's possessions predated Afton's understanding of remnant as a harvestable substance. Their binding to the animatronics happened organically, representing either a natural consequence of violent death in proximity to metal, or the result of Charlie's intervention through unknown supernatural means, or some combination of factors the games never fully explain. The fact that possession occurred at all, that spirits remain bound to the machines rather than moving on, speaks to the trauma and confusion of violent death, particularly death of children. These kids didn't understand what happened to them, didn't have closure, didn't have the ability to process and accept their fate. Their spirits clung to the physical world, to the last things they experienced, the suits, the restaurant, the need to find their killer. Charlie's intervention through Give Gifts, Give Life gave them the tools to express that clinging, transforming passive haunting into active possession, enabling them to move the animatronics, to hunt, to seek something resembling justice, even if they couldn't articulate what that meant. The help them message that flashes during the minigame indicates Charlie's awareness that what she's doing isn't ideal. She's not saving these children, not sending them to peaceful afterlife, not undoing their murders. She's trapping them in mechanical shells, enabling their spirits to remain in torment rather than finding rest. But from her perspective, from the puppet's understanding of the situation, maybe this is better than nothing. Maybe giving them power to move, to hunt, to potentially confront their killer, offers some form of agency in death they wouldn't otherwise have. Or maybe Charlie, herself a confused child spirit, simply didn't know what else to do, saw other victims, and instinctively reached out to help the only way she could, by making them like her, possessed, and eternal and trapped. The long-term consequences of this possession shaped everything that followed. The animatronic's aggressive behavior toward night guards, stemming from the possessing spirit's confusion and need to attack anything resembling their killer, created the game mechanic central to FNAF's entire franchise. The animatronics' inability to properly die, their persistence even when damaged or destroyed, came from spirits bound to metal refusing or unable to move on. The eventual revelation that these were children, that innocent victims drove the horror, transformed player understanding from scary robots to tragic ghosts, a tonal shift that defined FNAF's emotional core. Give Gifts, Give Life represents the moment when the Missing Children Incident's effects became permanent and supernatural, when 5 bodies hidden in animatronic suits became 5 souls trapped in mechanical prisons. Charlie Emily, through the puppet, meant to help. Instead, she extended the torture, ensuring the children would remain at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for decades, unable to leave, unable to rest, unable to do anything but wait and hunt and hope someone would finally give them the justice and closure that death should have brought, but didn't. The 6th victim debate. For years, the Five Nights at Freddy's community operated under what seemed like definitive information. 5 children died in the Missing Children Incident, 1 for each of the classic animatronics. Gabriel in Freddy, Jeremy in Bonnie, Susie in Chica, Fritz in Foxy, and Cassidy in Golden Freddy. 5 graves in Pizzeria Simulator's Lawkeeper ending, 5 names decoded from various sources, 5 masks in the Happiest Day minigame. The math worked cleanly. The symmetry satisfied narrative expectations. And then Into the Pit came along and showed 6 bodies lined against a wall in the safe room, 6 corpses wearing party hats, and suddenly that clean narrative developed a crack that refuses to close no matter how much the community tries to explain it away. The evidence for a 6th victim didn't start with Into the Pit's 2024 game adaptation, though that release dramatically amplified the debate. Hints and ambiguities existed in earlier material, subtle suggestions that the official count of 5 might be incomplete, that someone else died in that restaurant's back room, someone whose name and fate remain obscured. Let's examine the evidence chronologically, starting with the earliest hints and building toward the most recent and most explicit suggestions. The Toy Chica. The high school years segments from Ultimate Custom Night provided the first widely noticed hint of a 6th victim, though their metaphorical nature made interpretation controversial. These intermission cutscenes, presented as humorous anime parodies, show Toy Chica methodically pursuing and disposing of various characters, including Foxy, Freddy, Wolf, Toy Bonnie, Mangle, and the puppet. Each represents a kill. Each gets added to her bag. If we interpret these segments as metaphorical retellings of William Afton's murders, with Toy Chica representing Afton and her various victims representing his, the count becomes significant. 7 victims total when you include all the kills shown across the cutscenes. Breaking down the symbolism, the puppet represents Charlotte Emily, killed first in 1983 outside Fredbear's. 5 of the characters, Foxy, Freddy, and others, correlate with the 5 Missing Children Incident victims from 1985. That accounts for 6. The presence of a 7th kill implies another victim somewhere in the timeline, possibly from the 1985 incident specifically given how the cutscenes group the kills together. Some theorists point to the crying child from FNAF 4 as this 7th victim, arguing Toy Chica's cutscenes encompass all of Afton's child victim, across multiple incidents. Others insist the grouping specifically represents just the 1985 murders plus Charlotte, suggesting a 6th MCI victim we haven't properly identified. The Collect the Hats minigame from a later release reinforce these suspicions. Players collect 5 party hats representing the 5 known missing children, but a 6th hat exists in the game, hidden and requiring special actions to obtain. The symbolism of party hats, items worn during birthday celebrations, items that appear on the victims in Into the Pit's depiction of the murders, makes their use as victim representations clear. If 5 hats equal 5 victims, a 6th hat logically suggests a 6th victim. The fact that William Afton's sprite holds this 6th hat in the minigame directly connects it to him, to his murders, rather than to some unrelated context. Pick-up balloons followed a similar pattern. 5 balloons for 5 children, plus 1 additional balloon that appears special or secret. Balloons have served as victim symbolism throughout FNAF's history, floating away at the end of Happiest Day to represent spirits finding peace, appearing in Security Breaches Brazil, ending as visual confirmation of the MCI victim's ultimate fate. The consistent use of 5+1 imagery across multiple games and contexts suggests intentional storytelling, rather than coincidence or mechanical necessity for hiding collectibles. Then came Into the Pit, first as a Fazbear Fright story in 2019, then adapted into a game in 2024. The original story describes the protagonist encountering half a dozen dead children in the back room of the pizzeria, explicitly 6 rather than 5. The graphic novel adaptation maintained this count, showing 6 bodies. When the interactive game released in 2024, its depiction of what appears to be a warped memory or supernatural recreation of the Missing Children Incident showed 6 corpses on screen, 6 party hat-wearing victims positioned in the same room. The 6th body in the game notably has brown pants while the others wear red, visually distinguishing it from the established 5. However, it's crucial to note that Into the Pit explicitly deals with distorted memories rather than literal historical recreation. The ball pit shows altered versions of events, and the yellow rabbit creature itself is presented as something born from agony rather than William Afton himself, raising questions about whether the 6-body depiction represents literal fact or symbolic grouping of victims across incidents. The identity of this potential 6th victim has sparked fierce debate. The leading candidate is Andrew, a character from Fazbear Frights, who appears in the epilogues linking various stories together. Andrew, a young boy with curly black hair, serves as the one you should not have killed, a vengeful spirit who attached himself to William Afton's soul and kept him alive in horrific agony, torturing the killer from within. Andrew's characterization as especially vengeful, as separate from and more aggressive than the other MCI victims, supports the theory that he died alongside them, but his spirit took a different path, attached to Afton himself, rather than to an animatronic. Andrew's connection to alligator imagery, he wears an alligator mask at several points in Fazbear Frights, potentially links him to Montgomery Gator and to the remnants of Murray's Costume Manor's Jug Band characters that included early alligator designs. If Andrew exists in the game's continuity, as he exists in Fazbear Frights continuity, and if he was present during the Missing Children Incident, his absence from the Give Gifts, Give Life ritual makes au sense. He never received a mask from the puppet. He never possessed one of the standard animatronics. Instead, his spirit latched onto William Afton directly, tracking him, tormenting him, explaining why Golden Freddy, or one of its components, seems especially focused on Afton, in ways the other animatronics aren't. The problem with Andrew's candidacy is that he's never been explicitly confirmed to exist in the game's timeline. Fazbear Frights exists in an ambiguous canon relationship to the games. Scott Cawthon stated in a Steam post that the stories should be used to fill in blanks regarding the past, though he never definitively clarified whether they occur in the same continuity as the games or serve as parallel universe explorations of similar themes. This statement has been interpreted various ways by the community. Andrew appears nowhere in any mainline game under that name. His presence isn't confirmed on gravestones, in logbooks, or in minigames. The evidence for his existence in the games comes entirely from thematic parallels, visual hints in materials like Into the Pit, and the interpretation that Fazbear Frights characters can carry over conceptually, even if specific story details don't. An alternative interpretation suggests the sixth body in Into the Pit represents Charlotte Emily, and that the warped memory being depicted combines the MCI victims with Charlie from her earlier murder, grouping all of William Afton's child victims together, regardless of when or where they actually died. This would explain why Into the Pit shows 6 bodies in one scene, despite the MCI being understood as 5 victims. The ball pit, established in the story as showing distorted memories rather than precise historical recreation, might be blending separate incidents into one composite nightmare. Return to the Pit, the interactive novel sequel released in 2024, presents a different picture from Into the Pit's original depiction. The novel describes 5 dead children in the storage room, aligning with the traditional MCI count, rather than 6. However, it also includes a scene where Oswald discovers a separate dead child 2 days before encountering the main group of MCI victims. This earlier victim, found in the same storage room that would later contain the 5, could represent several possibilities. Andrew, or another victim killed by Afton in a separate incident around the same time frame. The first of the eventual 5 discovered before the others were brought to the room. Or a detail that doesn't necessarily contradict the 6 victim theory if we consider timing and location variables. The novel's relationship to both Into the Pit and the main game canon remains a subject of community interpretation. The Cassidy-Andrew connection theory proposes yet another angle. What if Cassidy and Andrew are somehow the same person, or 2 names for the same victim, or a case of identity confusion across different continuities? Some evidence supports Cassidy having characteristics associated with Andrew, particularly the vengeful nature and the attachment to William Afton seen in Ultimate Custom Night. But Cassidy is generally understood to be female based on logbook depictions and novel descriptions, while Andrew is clearly male in Fazbear Frights. The timeline placements differ, with Cassidy definitively among the 5 gravestones, while Andrew's status remains ambiguous. Merging them requires significant mental gymnastics and contradicts more evidence than it explains. The community remains divided on whether a 6th victim actually exists in the game's canon. Those supporting MCI 6 point to the accumulated evidence. Into the Pit's explicit 6-body depiction, the Toy Chica cutscenes, the collect the hats and pick up balloons 6th items, the thematic appropriateness of Andrew existing in games as he does in books. Those opposing MCI 6 emphasize that 5 graves appear in Pizzeria Simulator with 5 confirmed names that give gifts. Give Life shows only 5 children, including Golden Freddy's separate frame. That Return to the Pit walked back the 6-body count. That adding a 6th victim creates narrative complications and questions about why this person was never mentioned in the decade of games before Into the Pit. Scott Cawthon's approach to lore has always involved leaving certain elements ambiguous, providing just enough information to spark debate without definitive resolution. The sixth victim question might be intentionally unanswerable. A puzzle where contradictory evidence exists on both sides, because the true answer depends on which pieces of canon you prioritize, which interpretations you accept, which continuities you consider binding. Or it might be that future releases will clarify the situation, that the week before, Secret of the Mimic, or upcoming games will finally confirm whether June 26, 1985, claimed 5 victims or 6, whether Andrew exists in the game's timeline, whether Into the Pit's depiction should be read as literal or symbolic. For now, the debate persists. The clean narrative of 5 children, one for each animatronic, remains the majority understanding. But the evidence suggesting something more, someone else, someone hidden in the shadows of that back room, wearing a party hat alongside Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, refuses to be completely dismissed. The sixth victim, real or speculative, identified or unknown, represents the kind of unresolved mystery that defines Five Nights at Freddy's, the franchise that built its empire on questions that have answers just out of reach, on evidence that points in multiple directions, on truths that remain frustratingly obscured, no matter how deep the community digs. Golden Freddy's enduring mystery. If the sixth victim debate represents an unresolved question about the number of children who died, Golden Freddy represents an unresolved question about the nature of possession itself, about identity, about what it means to haunt a physical object when that object barely qualifies as physical. Golden Freddy, also referred to as Yellow Bear in early game files, appears across the franchise as something fundamentally different from Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Where those 4 animatronics move through halls and rooms following pathfinding algorithms modified by possessing spirits, Golden Freddy teleports, appears as a slumped costume with no endoskeleton visible, manifests as a floating head in hallways, vanishes when cameras switch or lights flicker. The possessed animatronics are ghosts driving machines. Golden Freddy is a ghost pretending to be a machine, or possibly 2 ghosts somehow sharing one spectral existence. The core identity question, who possesses Golden Freddy, has generated more theories and more passionate debate than perhaps any other element of FNAF's lore. The evidence initially seemed to point clearly to Cassidy, the 5th child from the Missing Children Incident, the name decoded from the survival logbook through coordinate puzzles, the spirit whose gravestone in Pizzeria Simulator corresponded to Golden Freddy's head position in FNAF 3's endings. Cassidy's gender remained ambiguous, depicted as female in graphic novels, but referred to with male pronouns by various sources. But the basic identification appeared solid. Cassidy equals Golden Freddy. Simple, clean, matching the pattern where each MCI victim possessed one animatronic. Then the complications emerged. The crying child from FNAF 4, the boy who suffered the bite of 83 when his head was crushed in Fredbear's mouth, kept appearing in contexts suggesting connection to Golden Freddy. The Fredbear plush that talks to him throughout FNAF 4 promises, "I will put you back together," after he flatlines in the hospital. Fredbear and Golden Freddy share obvious visual similarities, both being golden bears, though whether they're the same suit or different characters remains contested. If putting the crying child back together meant his spirit possessing an animatronic, Fredbear Golden Freddy would be the logical candidate, the machine that killed him potentially becoming his eternal prison in dark irony. The logbook itself, the source of Cassidy's name, contains conversations between 3 entities, Michael Afton writing in red ink completing the logbook as intended, a spirit in faded text asking questions about identity and memory, and a second spirit in altered text responding through coded messages. If the faded text represents the crying child trying to remember who he was, and the altered text represents Cassidy helping him remember, then the logbook shows these two spirits communicating, interacting, possibly sharing some connection beyond both being victims. This communication across the logbook's pages sparked the Golden Duo theory, the idea that both Cassidy and the crying child possess Golden Freddy simultaneously, two souls in one animatronic. Golden Duo draws support from the Stitch Wraith in Fazbear Frights, an entity explicitly confirmed to contain two spirits, Andrew and Jake, sharing one endoskeleton body and working together towards separate goals. If Scott used the Stitch Wraith to establish that two-spirit possession is possible in a FNAF's universe, then applying that concept to Golden Freddy resolves several apparent contradictions. It explains why Golden Freddy behaves differently from single-spirit possessions. It accounts for both the crying child's connection to Fredbear and Cassidy's identification as the fifth MCI victim. It provides narrative symmetry where the franchise's most mysterious animatronic has the most unusual possession circumstances. But Golden Duo creates its own problems. How would the crying child and Cassidy end up possessing the same suit when they died in different incidents at different locations 2 years apart? Did the crying child's spirit linger as Fredbear for years until Cassidy was murdered and stuffed into Golden Freddy, the same suit or a similar one, and their spirits merged? Does Golden Freddy's lack of proper physical presence, its ghost-like manifestations, stem from having two incompatible spirits trying to control one form? The logistics get messy, requiring assumptions about how possession works that the games never explicitly confirm. The alternative, Golden Cassidy, maintains that only Cassidy possesses Golden Freddy, that the crying child went somewhere else in death, maybe becoming Shadow Freddy or some other entity, maybe just moving on to afterlife. This keeps the possession pattern clean. One child per animatronic. No special cases beyond Golden Freddy's unique manifestation mechanics. Cassidy alone explains the survival logbook puzzle, the gravestone, the correlation with the fifth child from Give Gifts, Give Life. The crying child's story ends with his death in 1983, tragic but resolved, not extending into decades of haunting. Golden Victim, the theory that only the crying child possesses Golden Freddy, with Cassidy going elsewhere or not existing in game's continuity, has fallen out of favor, but still has supporters. This theory prioritizes the crying child's clear connection to Fredbear, his death in a bear animatronic's mouth, the Fredbear plush's promise of resurrection. Under this interpretation, Cassidy either doesn't exist in the games or possesses a different animatronic, possibly one not yet identified. Golden Victim faces the challenge of explaining why the survival logbook's puzzle would spell out Cassidy's name if she's not the fifth MCI victim and doesn't possess the franchise's most lore-significant animatronic. The one you should not have killed phrase from Ultimate Custom Night adds another layer. This entity, presumably Golden Freddy, given its prominence in UCN and its direct connection to keeping William Afton in Nightmare Purgatory, displays extreme vengefulness beyond what the other MCI victims show. It's personal, focused, dedicated to ensuring Afton suffers eternally. If this is Cassidy, it suggests she has more reason to hate Afton than Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, or Fritz do, despite all being murder victims. Perhaps Cassidy witnessed something worse, suffered more before death, or simply has a personality that clings to rage rather than seeking peace like the others eventually do in Happiest Day. If this is Andrew from Fazbear Frights, either replacing Cassidy in game's continuity or existing as the sixth victim, his attachment to Afton's soul rather than to an animatronic explains the extreme vengefulness and the difficulty of freeing him through normal means. The hospital scenario in The Man, in room 1280, where Andrew keeps Afton alive in agony despite medical attempts to let him die, parallels the ultimate custom night concept of eternally repeated torment. But again, Andrew has never been confirmed to exist in game's continuity, making his candidacy for Toys NHK speculative rather than proven. Gender ambiguity haunts the Golden Freddy debate. Cassidy is described with long black hair in Fourth Closet, but shown with different hair in logbook illustrations, referred to with female pronouns in novels, but with the one you should not have killed being called he by UCN animatronics. The vengeful spirit's face in UCN appears male to many viewers, blonde-haired and boyish, but others interpret it as deliberately androgynous or see female characteristics. Scott's choice to keep this ambiguous might be intentional, preventing easy resolution of whether Golden Freddy is Cassidy, the crying child, Andrew, or some combination. The Happiest Day minigame shows Golden Freddy's mask being placed last, after the other children receive their cakes and masks, after everyone gathers around the birthday table. The child receiving the Golden Freddy mask appears taller than the others once masked, an odd visual detail that might signify nothing or might represent two spirits merging into one form. The combined height of Cassidy and the crying child, creating a larger figure than any individual child would. The balloons floating away and masks being left behind represent spirits finding peace, moving on from their mechanical prisons to whatever comes next. Golden Freddy's participation in this release suggests that even this most mysterious possession ultimately concludes the same way the others do, in acceptance and departure. Except, Ultimate Custom Night implies Golden Freddy, or part of Golden Freddy, chose not to move on, chose to remain behind specifically to torment William Afton, ensuring he never escapes consequences for his crimes. If Happiest Day freed 4 spirits, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz, but left 1 or 2 behind, the crying child moving on while Cassidy stayed, or vice versa, or both staying initially, but one eventually leaving. This would explain both the peaceful ending implied by Happiest Day and the vengeful continuation shown in UCN. Freedom was offered. Not everyone took it. Revenge proved more appealing than rest for at least one spirit. The visual distinction between Golden Freddy and the Fredbear adds confusion. Are they the same character, the same suit, at different points in time or different conditions? Are they separate characters entirely? Fredbear belonging to Fredbear's family diner, while Golden Freddy is a different Golden Bear suite. At Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, Help Wanted's coins show Fredbear with purple accessories, while Golden Freddy has blue, suggesting visual differences beyond just naming. But other sources treat them as synonymous, the same character known by 2 names. If they're different suits, then the crying child dying in Fredbear and Cassidy, stuffed into Golden Freddy, creates logical separation between their fates. If they're the same suit, then that suit has history spanning from 1983 to far beyond, accumulating spiritual baggage from multiple victims. The franchise's refusal to definitively answer these questions, to clearly state, this is who possesses Golden Freddy, or this is how the possession works, or this is Golden Freddy's relationship to Fredbear, frustrates the community but also drives continued engagement. Every new game brings hope that this will be the release that finally clarifies Golden Freddy's nature. Every new book or spin-off potentially contains the missing piece that makes everything click into place. And yet, ambiguity persists, deliberately maintained by a creator who understands that mysteries generate discussion, that unsolved puzzles keep audiences invested, that sometimes the most interesting answer is no answer at all. Golden Freddy remains FNAF's greatest enigma, not because the evidence is lacking, but because it points in too many directions at once, because reasonable interpretations contradict each other while all having supporting material, because the truth seems to exist in some quantum state where multiple possibilities coexist until observation collapses them into one. Except observation never quite happens. The franchise always pulling back before full revelation. Cassidy possesses Golden Freddy. The crying child possesses Golden Freddy. Both possess Golden Freddy. Andrew possesses Golden Freddy. Someone we haven't identified yet possesses Golden Freddy. All of these statements have evidence. None have definitive proof. And so the debate continues. Year after year, theory after theory. The ghost in the golden bear suit, keeping its secrets close while community detectives keep digging for truth that might not exist in any single clean answer. The animatronics' behavioral changes. The animatronics at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza didn't immediately start hunting humans the moment the missing children possessed them. The transformation from entertainment robots to vengeful hunters occurred gradually, driven by the possessing spirit's growing awareness and anger, by their confusion about their situation, by their desperate need to find and punish the man who killed them. Understanding this behavioral evolution requires looking at how the animatronics operated before and after possession, at the mechanics that made them vulnerable to spiritual hijacking, and at what the possessed versions were actually trying to accomplish during their nightly hunts. Pre-possession, the animatronics were sophisticated for their era, but ultimately just machines following programmed behaviors. They performed choreographed songs during the day, their movements synchronized to music, their recorded voices delivering jokes and birthday messages on cue. The free-roaming mode Phone Guy mentions allowed them to walk around when not actively performing, preventing the servos from locking up due to lack of use. This free-roaming capability, intended as preventative maintenance, inadvertently created the mechanical foundation for possessed versions to move autonomously at night. The robots already had pathfinding algorithms, already could navigate the building's layout, already could identify objects and people through basic sensors. The spirits didn't invent these abilities. They hijacked and redirected them toward new purposes. The smell came first. Parents and staff noticed a foul odor emanating from the animatronics weeks after June 26th, the stench of decomposition becoming gradually more pronounced as the children's bodies broke down inside the metal shells. Phone Guy's Night 1 message attributes the smell to the robots not having been cleaned in their 20-plus years of service, a cover story that becomes darkly ironic knowing he's smelling corpses. The blood and mucus reported around the animatronics' eyes and mouths represented bodily fluids leaking from the concealed bodies. Visible evidence of the horror hidden inside that management either didn't recognize or chose to ignore for as long as possible. The behavioral changes likely manifested gradually rather than all at once. Maybe Freddy's movements during shows became slightly off, his turns not quite synchronized with the music. Maybe Bonnie's head twitched at odd angles. Maybe Foxy's movements behind the Pirate Cove curtain seemed more erratic than programmed. Small glitches that maintenance chalked up to wear and tear, to faulty servos or corrupted programming. not recognizing these deviations as evidence of consciousness emerging inside the machines. The first confirmed aggressive incident we know of occurs during FNAF 2's timeframe in 1987, but the original animatronics were already malfunctioning enough by then to be retired as the withered versions, kept in parts and the service, while the new toy animatronics took over performing duties. This retirement suggests the possessed animatronics had become too unreliable or too dangerous for public interaction well before 1987. Their behavior during the day shows degraded enough that Fazbear Entertainment felt safer building new robots than trying to fix what appeared to be mechanical issues with the old ones. The nighttime hunting behavior, the core mechanic of the FNAF games, stems from the possessing spirits' confused understanding of their situation and their desperate search for William Afton. Phone Guy's explanation in FNAF 1 provides the in-universe justification. The animatronics see security guards as endoskeletons without costumes, against the rules at Freddy's, and therefore needing to be stuffed into suits. But this explanation, while accurate to what the animatronics are doing, misunderstands why. The spirits aren't enforcing company policy. They're compulsively reenacting their own deaths, trying to make sense of what happened to them by doing to others what was done to them. More accurately, the spirits are searching for the man who killed them, attacking anyone who remotely resembles that figure. Adult men working night shifts in the building where they died trigger the spirit's hunt response. The animatronics can't distinguish between different adult men, can't identify William Afton specifically from other guards, so they attack all of them, desperate hope that this one, this time, might be the killer, might be the one who deserves what's coming. The parallel to how animal predators behave, Scott's descriptor of the spirits having animal-like mentality, captures the base instinct nature of their actions. See threat, attack threat, stuff threat into suit, because that's the last clear memory before everything went dark. The aggression isn't strategic or intelligent in most cases. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy patrol randomly or semi-randomly, their movements showing patterns but not complex planning. They follow pathways they learned as functioning entertainment robots, checking the same rooms, moving through the same hallways, the spirits using the animatronics' existing navigation systems rather than inventing new ones. The jump scares, the sudden rushes toward the guard's position when they reach the office, represent the moment when the spirit fully commits to attack, when the confused anger boils over into action. Foxy's behavior stands out as distinctly more aggressive than the others, sprinting full speed down the hall toward the office once he leaves Pirate Cove, an attack pattern that feels more purposeful than Freddy's meandering or Bonnie and Chica's room-by-room approach. This might reflect Fritz's personality manifesting through Foxy's pirate character, a more direct, confrontational approach to hunting. Or it might just be that Foxy's programming included rapid movement abilities for performance purposes, rushing out from behind the curtain for surprise entertainment, and Fritz's spirit uses this existing capability more effectively than the others use their standard walking speeds. Golden Freddy's different behavior, appearing suddenly in the office rather than moving through the building room by room, reflects Cassidy's unique possession circumstances. Without a physical endoskeleton to move, without the mechanical limitations the others face, Golden Freddy operates more as pure apparition than possessed machine. The slumped costume appearance, the lack of functional mobility, suggests Cassidy learned to manifest the visual form of the suit without needing its mechanical components, a purely supernatural expression of presence rather than a spirit driving a robot. The animatronics' inability to recognize each other as allies or even as other possessed victims indicates just how limited their awareness remains. They don't communicate, don't coordinate, don't show evidence of understanding that Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy are all on the same side, all hunting for the same man. They operate independently, each spirit focused only on its own imperatives, its own confused need to find and punish whoever put them in these metal bodies. This isolation mirrors how they died, each lured away separately, each killed alone in that back room, unable to call for help, unaware of the other's fates until it was too late. The possession preserves that isolation, keeping them fractured and separate, even as their bodies rot together in the same building. The bite of 87, occurring at the FNAF 2 location when Jeremy Fitzgerald worked the day shift for a birthday party, represents the possessed animatronic's danger reaching its apex. One of the toy animatronics bit into a person's frontal lobe during operating hours, in front of witnesses, causing severe injury. The specific animatronic responsible has never been definitively confirmed by the games, though community speculation has focused on candidates like Mangle or Toy Chica, based on design features and behavioral patterns. The exact circumstances, whether the attack stemmed from possession, malfunction, or response to perceived threat, remain ambiguous in the canon. The aftermath of the bite of 87 saw Fazbear Entertainment implement strict rules against animatronics moving during the day, confining them to the stage during operating hours to prevent further attacks. This restriction fundamentally changed how restaurants could operate, turning the robots from interactive performers walking among crowds into static stage presences that only moved during pre-programmed shows. The company blamed programming errors or mechanical failures rather than acknowledging possession, maintaining the fiction that these were just malfunctioning machines rather than vengeful ghosts. The animatronics' behavior in FNAF 3, 30 years after the original murders, shows how persistent the haunting remained. Even with Freddy's closed for decades, even with the animatronics left to rot in sealed buildings, the spirits stayed bound to their metal prisons, unable or unwilling to leave. When William Afton returns to dismantle them in the Follow Me minigames, the spirits emerge to confront him, finally facing their killer, finally having the opportunity for direct revenge. Their pursuit of Afton into the Spring Bonnie suit, watching as the Springlocks engage and crush him, represents the closest thing to victory these spirits achieved before Happiest Day freed them entirely. Phone Guy's fate in FNAF 1, dying in a coordinated attack by multiple animatronics on Night 4, demonstrates how dangerous the possessed machines became when working together toward a target. The sounds of Freddy's music box, Bonnie and Chica's pounding on doors, the chaos of Phone Guy's final moments show the animatronics combining their individual approaches into something more effective than random patrol patterns. Whether this coordination represented the spirits learning to cooperate or just happened coincidentally, as multiple animatronics pursued the same target remains unclear, but the result was lethal regardless. The behavioral changes throughout the franchise's timeline reflect spirits growing more aware, more purposeful, more dangerous as years pass. Early glitches and odd movements evolved into deliberate hunting patterns. Passive haunting became active possession. Confused children became angry predators. The transformation wasn't immediate or simple, but it was inexorable, driven by the fundamental injustice at the core of their situation. They were murdered and stuffed into these machines, and nothing and no one had given them the justice or peace they deserved. so they created their own form of both, hunting in the building where they died, attacking anyone who resembled their killer, waiting for either William Afton to return so they could finish what they started, or for someone to finally set them free from the metal prisons that had held them for so long. Long-term consequences. Through the series, The Missing Children, incidents' effects rippled forward through every subsequent entry in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, establishing patterns, motivations, and supernatural mechanics that defined how the series would approach horror, tragedy, and the question of what happens when innocent deaths go unavenged. The incident wasn't just backstory. It was the foundation, the original sin from which everything else flowed, the proof that Fazbear Entertainment would sacrifice children's lives for profit, and that William Afton would exploit any system to satisfy his obsessions. Understanding how this one event shaped the entire timeline requires tracing its influence through each major game and narrative development. In FNAF 2, set in 1987, we see immediate aftermath still unfolding. The withered animatronics, the original Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, sit in the parts and service room of the new location, retired from active use, but still possessed by the children's spirits. The toy animatronics built to replace them receive cutting-edge facial recognition software linked to criminal databases, a direct response to the 1985 murders. Fazbear Entertainment's attempt to use technology to prevent another William Afton from operating in their restaurants. The irony, of course, is that Afton returns anyway, shown in the Save Them minigame wearing a purple uniform and badge, working at the location, murdering 5 more children despite the new security measures. The MCI created conditions that should have prevented similar crimes, yet the company's fundamental failures meant history repeated, more victims added to Afton's tally. The puppet's presence in FNAF 2, actively trying to save children, shown in the Save Them minigame, where text flashes "Save them" and "Help them" as the player navigates toward dead bodies, stems directly from Charlie's response to the MCI. Having failed to stop William from killing Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, having only been able to grant them possession rather than salvation, Charlie, as the puppet, tries harder to intervene in 1987's murders. The minigame shows the puppet following withered Freddy through the building, reaching dead children too late to save them, the phrase "you can't" appearing to emphasize the futility. This desperation, this need to help other victims even though she couldn't save herself or the MCI kids, drives the puppet's actions throughout the timeline. FNAF 1, set in 1993, demonstrates the long-term decline of the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza under the weight of accumulated tragedies. The building has been left to rot, Phone Guy mentions in his call, 20+ years without proper maintenance. The animatronics, still containing the bodies of children murdered 8 years prior, stand in dimly lit corners of a dying establishment. Michael Afton, William's son, takes the night guard position under the alias Mike Schmidt, drawn to the location by his family connection and his guilt over his younger brother's death in 1983. The survival logbook confirms Michael worked this location, his drawings of nightmare animatronics appearing in the book's margins, suggesting the job affected him psychologically. The spirits in Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy by this point had been trapped in their animatronic shells for nearly a decade, attacking night guards over hundreds of shifts, never finding William Afton, never achieving the revenge they desperately sought. Phone Guy dies on night 4 of the week before Mike's shift, killed by these same spirits during a coordinated attack that suggests their tactics had evolved over years of hunting. The location closes at the end of the year, having finally exhausted every attempt to remain viable despite the deaths, the smell, the aggressive robots, and the accumulated horror that had poisoned the restaurant's reputation beyond recovery. FNAF 3, set in 2023, 30 years after FNAF 1's closure, shows Fazbear's Fright attempting to capitalize on the Missing Children Incident as entertainment, an attraction based on real murders, displaying relics from the closed restaurants like macabre museum pieces. The discovery of Springtrap, William Afton trapped inside the Spring Bonnie suite, after the spring locks crushed him, represents the incident's direct consequence, catching up to its perpetrator. The Follow Me minigames depict Afton returning to dismantle the original animatronics, presumably to harvest their remnant for his experiments, only to be confronted by the spirits he murdered. They chase him into the safe room, the same room where he killed them, where he dons the Spring Bonnie suit in attempted intimidation, where moisture triggers the locks and kills him. This confrontation, occurring sometime between 1993 and 2023's timeframe, gave the MCI victims their revenge finally, watching their killer die in agony as metal pieces pierced his flesh. But it didn't free them. Not yet. Springtrap's survival as an undead amalgamation meant Afton persisted, and the spirits remained bound to their purpose as long as he existed. Only after Happiest Day, the secret minigame achieved through gathering cake to children scattered across other minigames, do the spirits finally receive release. The scene of children gathered around a table, receiving cake from the puppet, donning masks one final time before those masks fall away and balloons float upward, represents hard-earned peace, the party they deserved in life finally given in death, allowing them to move on. Pizzeria Simulator, FNAF 6, set after FNAF 3, revolves around Henry Emily's plan to end everything connected to the Missing Children Incident. He constructs a fake pizzeria to lure possessed animatronics, including Scrap Baby containing Elizabeth Afton, Molten Freddy containing remnant possibly from the MCI victims after Afton harvested and injected it into Funtime animatronics, and Scraptrap, Afton's rebuilt form after Fazbear's Fright burned. The Lawkeeper ending provides definitive information about the MCI through gravestones positioned to correspond with animatronic heads from FNAF 3, finally giving us Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz's names, along with the obscured fifth grave presumably belonging to Cassidy. Henry's speech during the fire addresses Charlie directly, acknowledging her sacrifice. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. He recognizes that Charlie stayed to help free the others, that her possession of the puppet served a purpose beyond her own existence. He addresses the MCI victims too. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms the way you lifted others into yours. The fire is meant to release all of them, to superheat the remnant binding their spirits, to finally end the haunting that began in 1985. Ultimate Custom Night, depending on interpretation, shows either William Afton's purgatory or a nightmare constructed by the vengeful spirit, one of the MCI victims refusing to let him go even after the pizzeria simulator. Fire. The animatronics' voice lines reference the murders, the spirits, the decades of hunting. Withered Chica's "I was the first" confirms Susie's death order. Various others speak to the killer directly, acknowledging what he did, refusing to forgive. This eternal torment, if that's what UCN represents, stems from at least one spirit deciding peace wasn't enough, that Afton deserved perpetual suffering for his crimes. The MCI's aftermath extends beyond even death, beyond fire, into something resembling hell. Help Wanted's Princess Quest segments and Help Wanted 2's expansion of that storyline show the MCI victims' memories preserved in digital format, their graves becoming puzzles in virtual space, their release requiring players to light torches in proper sequence. The franchise's move into virtual reality horror doesn't escape the MCI's gravity, instead finding new ways to explore how these deaths haunted every aspect of Fazbear Entertainment's operations, how even decades later, even in digital recreations, the murdered children's presence lingered. Security Breach, set in a massive modern pizzaplex built atop the old Pizzeria Simulator location, shows gravestones on a hill visible in the certain endings, suggesting the MCI victims finally found proper burial, proper memorial, final rest. The balloons floating in the Brazil ending sky, 5 balloons rising towards sunset, call back to Happiest Days imagery, suggesting the spirit stories concluded peacefully despite everything. Yet the franchise continues, new threats emerging. But the missing children themselves, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, appear to have finally escaped the cycle that trapped them since 1985. The incident's influence on William Afton's character development can't be overstated. The possession that resulted from the MCI murders fascinated him, drove him to experiment with remnant extraction and injection, to build the Funtime animatronics with child capture capabilities, to turn what should have horrified any rational person into research opportunity. His sister location projects, his work with Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals, his eventual harvesting of remnant from the original animatronics, all stem from what he learned watching dead children's spirits inhabit metal shells. The MCI didn't end his killing. It inspired new methods, new goals, a shift from murder for whatever twisted satisfaction to murder as experimentation toward understanding consciousness, death, and mechanical immortality. For Michael Afton, the MCI represented inherited guilt. His father's crimes, his family's connection to Fazbear Entertainment, the realization that the animatronics hunting him were victims seeking justice against someone who looked like William, weighed on him through his journey across the franchise. The survival logbooks, Do You Have Dreams? Questions from Spirits, the references to Freddy's in various materials connected to Michael, show how the MCI and its aftermath became his mission too, trying to undo what his father created, trying to free the trapped spirits, trying to make something right out of generational horror. The Missing Children Incident established that in FNAF's universe, death doesn't end consciousness. Trauma persists beyond physical existence. Children's suffering continues until someone actively works to grant them peace. And corporate negligence combined with individual evil creates consequences lasting decades. Every game returned to these themes, found new angles to explore them, expanded the mythology while keeping the MCI as foundational truth. 5 children walked into a back room and never came home. Everything else, all the terror, all the tragedy, all the supernatural horror across 11 main games and countless spin-offs, trace back to that June day in 1985 when William Afton put on a spring Bonnie suit and exploited every vulnerability in a system designed to profit from children's joy. Conclusion: the mystery that remains. Here we are at the end, having walked through every documented detail of the Missing Children incident, examined newspaper clippings and minigame frames, debated 6 victims versus 5, explored possession mechanics and remnant theory, traced consequences across 40 years of in-universe timeline, and 11 years of real-world franchise history. And somehow, impossibly, frustratingly, appropriately, we still don't have complete answers. We still don't know definitively who the sixth victim is, or if they exist. We still debate whether Cassidy alone possesses Golden Freddy, or shares that prison with the crying child. We still can't say with certainty what remnant is beyond supernatural substance that binds souls, or how exactly give gifts, give life worked as a process. This is Five Nights at Freddy's in its purest form. A franchise built on mysteries that receive partial solutions, on evidence that points in multiple directions, on a creator who understands that the most engaging stories are the ones readers and players complete themselves through interpretation and debate. Scott Cawthon provided the framework, the newspaper clippings and minigames and gravestones, the voice lines and hidden messages and coordinate puzzles. The community built the investigation, connecting dots, finding patterns, arguing over whether those patterns represented intentional storytelling or coincidental game design. What do we know for certain about the Missing Children Incident? June 26, 1985. Multiple children disappeared from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza during operating hours. A man in a company mascot costume, identified through video surveillance as William Afton, though he escaped conviction, lured them to the back room. The children were murdered, their bodies stuffed into animatronic suits where they remained undiscovered for weeks or months. The spirits of at least 5 children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, came to possess the animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy, through intervention by Charlotte Emily's spirit in the puppet. These possessed animatronics hunted night guards for years, searching for William Afton, attacking anyone who resembled him. Eventually, through various events across the franchise's timeline, the spirits found either peace through Happiest Day, or revenge through tormenting Afton in Ultimate Custom Night, or both. Those facts, corroborated by multiple sources and generally accepted across the community, form the skeleton. But skeletons alone don't capture the full shape of what the Missing Children Incident means to FNAF's narrative, or why it resonates so powerfully despite, or perhaps because of, its ambiguities. The incident works as horror because it reflects real-world fears, children vulnerable in public spaces, trusted figures exploiting that trust, systems failing to protect the innocent, justice delayed or denied. It works as tragedy because the victims had names, had personalities hinted at through fruity maze and voice lines, had families who lost them and never recovered. It works as supernatural fiction because the possession adds layers beyond simple ghost story, raising questions about consciousness, death, identity, revenge versus peace, what it means to be trapped versus freed. Scott Cawthon's approach to the MCI, gradually revealing information across games, rather than explaining everything up front, created space for community engagement that might not have existed with more straightforward storytelling. The first game's newspaper clippings raised questions. The second game's minigames provided pieces of answers. The third game showed confrontation. Pizzeria Simulator gave names. Ultimate Custom Night explored aftermath. Each release built on previous revelations while introducing new mysteries, keeping the MCI relevant and discussable even as the franchise moved to new eras and new threats. The sixth victim debate epitomizes how FNAF handles law. Evidence exists on both sides. Into the Pit shows 6 bodies. Toy Chica's cutscenes suggest additional victims. Collect the Hats includes a 6th item. But Return to the Pit walks back to 5. Pizzeria Simulator shows 5 graves. Give Gifts, Give Life depicts 5 possessions counting Golden Freddy's separate frame. Reasonable people can interpret the same material differently, prioritize different sources, reach different conclusions. There's no objectively correct answer because Scott hasn't provided one. Possibly because he wants the debate to continue. Possibly because even he hasn't decided. Possibly because the truth exists somewhere in between interpretations. The Golden Freddy mystery operates similarly. Cassidy possessing alone makes narrative sense, matches the gravestone evidence, keeps the pattern clean. Golden Duo explains the uniqueness of Golden Freddy's behavior, accounts for both Cassidy and the crying child's connections to golden bears, parallels the Stitch Wraith's confirmed 2-spirit possession. Golden Victim prioritizes the crying child's clear Fredbear connection, his death in a bear's mouth, the Fredbear plush's promises. All 3 theories have merit. All 3 have problems. The community will likely debate this until Scott definitively settles it, if he ever does, and possibly even after that. Why does Scott keep these elements ambiguous? Partially practical considerations, making up lore as development progressed, means some details weren't planned from the start. Retcons and revisions accumulate. But largely, deliberate design. Mysteries drive engagement. Debates create community. Puzzles that might be unsolvable are more interesting than puzzles with obvious solutions found immediately. FNAF's success stems partly from being a good horror game, yes, but equally from being an endless conversation. A franchise where every new release is dissected frame by frame, where fans create 100-page theory documents and multi-hour video essays, where the line between solving the lore and creating the lore through interpretation becomes delightfully blurred. The Missing Children Incident sits at the center of all that. The Rosetta Stone everyone is trying to translate. The murder mystery that might never be fully solved because the detective chose to leave certain evidence locked away. We know who died, but not if there was a 6th. We know how they were lured, but not every specific detail of what was said. We know possession occurred, but not the complete mechanics of how Charlie granted life. We know the spirits hunted, but not whether they understood what they were doing or operated purely on instinct. We know some found peace, but not whether all did, or whether vengeance kept at least one bound to eternal torment of their killer. These gaps aren't failures of storytelling. They're features. They're invitations to imagine, to theorize, to debate. They're acknowledgement that sometimes the most affecting stories are the ones we complete ourselves, where our interpretation and emotional investment shape the narrative as much as the creator's original intent. The Missing Children Incident is whatever we understand it to be, based on the evidence we prioritize, the theories we find most compelling, the emotional truth that resonates with our read of these characters and their tragedies. What remains undeniable, regardless of interpretation or theory, is the incident's centrality to everything FNAF represents. 5 children, possibly 6, died when they shouldn't have. A company valued profit over safety. A killer exploited trust and escaped justice. Spirits trapped in machines hunted for decades seeking something, anything, that resembled resolution. And an entire franchise built on those simple, horrible facts, explored them from every angle, found new ways to make us feel the weight of children's deaths, the unfairness of unavenged murder, the complexity of vengeance versus peace, the horror of consciousness persisting in mechanical prisons. If you've listened this far, whether drifting towards sleep or fully engaged, you've walked through everything we know and everything we don't about the Missing Children Incident. The timeline, the victims, the killer, the investigation, the possession, the debates, the consequences. You've seen how one event on one June day in 1985 shaped the next 40 years of in-universe history and 11 years of franchise development. You've encountered the mysteries that persist despite years of community investigation, the questions that might never have definitive answers but remain endlessly fascinating to explore. The Missing Children incident was horror. It was tragedy. It was the moment Five Nights at Freddy's revealed itself as more than just a jump scare game, as a story about loss and revenge and the terrible weights carried by spirits who can't move forward, and the living who inherit their unfinished business. It was 5 children who deserved better, who got the worst, who became the franchise's beating heart even in death, especially in death. Their presence felt in every game that followed, even when they weren't directly featured. If you enjoyed this deep dive into FNAF's darkest chapter, consider leaving a like and subscribing to Night Mode Lore. We're here to explore the franchise's most complex stories, the lore that requires hours of careful examination, the mysteries that keep communities engaged years after games release. Let me know in the comments what aspect of the Missing Children incident you find most fascinating, which theory you subscribe to, what questions you still want answered, and whether you're here for the lore deep dives or the sleep-friendly exploration of horror narratives. Thank you for spending this time walking through Freddy Fazbear's darkest hours. The Missing Children incident happened June 26, 1985. 40 years later, we're still trying to understand it completely. Maybe we never will. Maybe that's exactly how it should be. Some horrors resist full explanation. Some tragedies remain partially obscured no matter how much light we shine into their corners. And some stories, the best ones, the ones that matter most, are the ones we never quite finish telling. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, and possibly one more whose name we still don't know. Rest in peace, or in vengeance, or in whatever space possessed spirits occupy between this world and the next. Your story has been told, again and again, in minigames and theories and videos like this. You're remembered, you're memorialized, and you're finally free, assuming happiest day worked, assuming the balloons really did carry you away, assuming peace was possible after everything. Thank you for listening. Sleep well, if that's where you're headed. And remember, in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, the past never stays buried. It just waits in the dark, patient and persistent, ready to remind us that some stories, some tragedies, some mysteries echo forever. Good night.